Hi, Dr. Pulsfer here to ask a fundamental question about the nature of games. Where does the interest and enjoyment in games come from? If you like to use the word fun, you can substitute the word fun. Perhaps it's an odd question, but it's an important question. How does a game provide interest, enjoyment, fun, when it's just a pile of cardboard and plastic or just a bunch of electrons or software instructions? How does the magic happen? Where does the magic come from? Yes, it comes from the designer, but it can also come from people. In traditional games, and some current tabletop games, it comes from the actions of other people, the other players. Opposition is at the heart of traditional games, and people can provide more unpredictable, imaginative, and capable opposition than any computer can at this time. That opposition in most traditional games is active. It's trying to hinder. It is not predictable. It can change. It doesn't merely provide passive obstacles. Now, puzzles are kind of the opposite. They're primarily passive, never-changing obstacles. Yes, puzzles are ultimately devised by people, but no one other than the player or a group of players in a co-op participates in the play activity. That is, it's fundamentally passive. There's no active opposition. Now, extensive programming can make it active again by providing a semblance of human opposition. But online video game players will tell you human opposition is much tougher than computer opposition, where it's not just a matter of reflexes and athleticism. Video game programming can use procedural content, that is to say, obstacles generated on the fly by the software. Now, that's not entirely passive, but once the obstacles are there, they're there. They're not actively aware. Typical applications here: more dungeons to explore, more star systems to visit and explore, more different kinds of monsters to fight, so forth. This procedural content provides variety rather than gameplay depth. What about parallel competitions? Some games don't allow much, if any, opposition. Think of Olympic individual sports such as swimming, or think of a hot dog eating contest, or some kinds of races. Some races allow one player to provide an obstacle to another player, some don't. And of course we have the multiplayer solitaire that is now common in tabletop board and card games. These are all much more like puzzles than like traditional games. Whatever opposition there is comes from the rules of the game, not from other players. Now, I have terms for this: the system and the psychological, which is a major dichotomy in games. At one end of the spectrum, we have a game where the system provides all the challenge and opposition. In video games, the term is PvE, player versus environment. At the other end, we have games where people provide virtually all the challenge and opposition, as in poker or even rock, paper, scissors. And this is known as PvP, player versus player, in video games. So game designers, as opposed to puzzle designers, have a stupendous advantage. Humans provide much of the interest and the quality of the game via their interaction with other humans in the game. You as a designer can provide relatively simple rules that enable interesting, complex interactions to emerge. You can't do that with a puzzle or with a parallel competition or with a single-player game. On the other hand, game designers have much less control than puzzle designers. There are certainly designers who don't want people to mess up their games. I'm going to quote Warren Spector, who, of course, designed Deus Ex and Epic Mickey and other games. "I don't like playing with other people. I like interacting with stories myself. That's what I do as a gamer and as a developer." Sounds more like a novel or a film to me. But it gives the designer much more control over how the game goes. The designer knows what the player can do and can arrange what's going to happen next. Designers of people games have to cope with all the vagaries of people. They can't control everything. Now, many video game designers want to craft quote-unquote experiences. This again is more closely related to films and comics and novels than to traditional games. The designer wants to provide all the content just as the director of a movie or the author of a novel provides all the content, kind of like Warren Spector. Single-player games make this much more easier to achieve. So, there's no single formula or description that can encompass all the things we call games, but we can say that the magic in games either comes from people or comes from the intricacies of puzzles. Thanks for listening.